All right, let's look at Prep Test 24 Game 3, which is from December 1997, so the third game from that test. This is a complex linear game where they give us 6 textbooks and they want us to put those textbooks in order for 2 different editors. One editor is Juarez and the other editor is Rosenberg. So each of the editors is going to read all of the textbooks, and so we need to put them in order. One's for Juarez and one's for Rosenberg. They also give us 2 different kinds of textbooks: introductory, which is F, G, and H, and advanced, which is X, Y, and Z. So, I think one of the things people do have problems with this game when they're practicing it, and it is somewhat of a difficult game. I think what makes it difficult is that there's a lot of different elements going on, and then when you make deductions, you have to use a previous deduction to make a new deduction. So that kind of building process sometimes gives students problem also. But I was going to say that one of the things that I think is difficult is that you have Juarez, you have Rosenberg, and then you have introductory books and advanced books. And then in the rules, they have some rules that just apply to Juarez, or some rules that just apply to Rosenberg, some rules that just apply to introductory books, and some rules that just apply to advanced books. So keeping all that straight, I think, is what makes the game difficult. But uh, in the end, I think that it's actually kind of a fun game because of the difficulty and because you can keep building one deduction upon another. Uh, you kind of do hopefully get some satisfaction once you're done and you get them all right. Um, but let's see if that happens, okay? So just to reiterate, the introductory books are F, G, and H, and the advanced textbooks are X, Y, and Z. Uh, and then they tell us that the 2 editors cannot evaluate the same book in the same week. Okay, so that makes sense. The next rule is that all of the introductory books are reviewed by Juarez before they're uh, reviewed by Rosenberg. Let me make sure that's clear. The way I said it might not be clear. For any individual book that's introductory, it has to be reviewed by Juarez before Rosenberg gets it. Okay, and then the opposite is true for the advanced textbooks. So for any particular advanced textbook, it would have to be reviewed by Rosenberg before it's reviewed by Juarez. All right. The next rule says that Rosenberg cannot evaluate 2 introductory textbooks in a row. So this is a non-consecutive rule, which we see a lot in the logic games, saying that these 2 particular kinds of things, in this case, introductory textbooks, cannot be consecutive. Okay, but this rule only applies to Rosenberg. Okay, it doesn't apply to Juarez. And then finally, the last rule says that Juarez reviews the book X, the textbook X, in week 4. Okay, so I just went ahead and put that X over here in 4 for Juarez. Uh, and that would complete the basic setup. I mean, we talked about the rules, and I've set it up like like you would a normal advanced linear game. Almost every advanced linear games get set up exactly like this, where you have 2 stacks. Uh, Now let's look at the deductions, because as I mentioned before, there's quite a few of them, and you can do them before the game even starts, and really you're best served by doing it that way. So let's try to talk through how you would make the deductions. So the first thing that we probably pay attention to is this rule, or this one. Doesn't really matter which one we start with, but the idea that Juarez has to uh, take all of the intro take each of the introductory books before Rosenberg can get it. Okay, so that, for example, what this means, right, is that Rosenberg, in his first week, he can't review any introductory textbooks, right? Because Juarez would not have reviewed any, and he can't review any of them until Juarez reviews them. So Rosenberg would not be able to review any introductory textbooks in his first week. So we can put that down here as a bunch of no-goes, right? For Rosenberg, we know that the introductory textbooks, which are F, G, and H, we know that Rosenberg can't review those in the first week. Let me make that bigger. Okay, and the opposite holds for Juarez in his first week. Because of this rule, uh, Rosenberg has to review any advanced textbook before Juarez can review it. So that means that Juarez can't review advanced textbooks in the first week because they will not yet have been reviewed by Rosenberg. So X, Y, Z are no-goes for Juarez in the first week. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's think about the other side of that rule. All right? We know that Rosenberg, for example, has to review all of the textbooks. In particular, at some point, Rosenberg is going to have to review the introductory textbooks F, G, and H. We just said that he can't review them first. Okay? But one thing that hopefully pops into your head is that if Juarez reviewed any of those textbooks in his last week, right, in week 6, then there would be no time for Rosenberg to review those books, right? If we put, for example, just to be clear, if we put an F here, okay, then when would Rosenberg review F? Because it has to be reviewed by Juarez before it's reviewed by Rosenberg. So we can't put the F here. And the same analysis holds for the F, G, and H. So, sorry, for the G and H also. So we know that F, G, and H cannot be reviewed by Juarez in the last week. Okay? And then the symmetrical point holds for Rosenberg, which is that since Rosenberg has to review X, Y, and Z before Juarez can, then Rosenberg cannot review X, Y, and Z in week 6 because that would leave no time for Juarez to review those books. Okay? So I think that's these 4 sets of no-goes. This, and this is probably the first thing that most people would think about or come to. There's one other thing, and you could have done first, which is also important and somewhat apparent, I think, which is it has to do with this X. Okay, so remember, this X is an advanced textbook. Okay, and Juarez cannot review the advanced textbook until Rosenberg has reviewed it. So if Juarez is reviewing this advanced textbook X in week 4, that means that Rosenberg must have reviewed it before week 4. Okay, so we know that the X is going to go somewhere in 1, 2, and 3, somewhere over here, because it has to be sometime before Juarez reviews it. Now, you could write this a couple ways. You could, draw an arc here and put the X is going to be somewhere there, or you can just go with the no-goes, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say that the X can't be in 5 and the X can't be in 4, okay, because of the reason we just mentioned. So a lot of people get this far. A lot of people do indeed get this far. But there's more deductions that we can make. And you kind of use the deductions that we've already made to figure more stuff out. And I think that that's where the difficulty comes in. But we didn't complete all the rules yet. We actually have not, we talked about all of them initially, but we haven't really considered all of them in terms of our deductions. Let's look at this last rule, which says that Rosenberg cannot do introductory textbooks next to each other. And here's where I think we start building. Rosenberg cannot review introductory textbooks in a row, right, consecutively. So the introductory textbooks, as a reminder, are F, G, and H. So it turns out that we already figured out that Rosenberg also cannot review introductory textbooks on day 1. So now the spaces that we have available for the introductory textbooks as far as Rosenberg is concerned are 2, 4, 2 through 6, I should say. 2 through 6, okay? Because you can't do it on 1. But if we want to space 3 items non-consecutively, how many spaces do we need? And we need 5 spaces, right? In fact, if we wanted to space 3 items, sorry, we do want to space 3 here. If we wanted to space 4 items non-consecutively, we would need 7 spaces. And if we wanted to space 5 items, we would need 9 spaces, right? You need like 1 less than double is the rule. 1 less than double however many variables you're trying to space non-consecutively. So in this case, we have 3 variables. We want to space them non-consecutively. We're going to require 5 spaces. And it's a good thing we don't require more than that because 5 is all we have, right? So we know that this is going to be an introductory textbook in 2. So I'm just going to write it. We could write an I, but I'm going to write an F/G/H and try to squeeze it in there. And then replicate it twice because we know that F4 is also going to be an F, G, and H, and 6 is also going to be an F, G, H. And as usual, I'm going to err on the side of going slowly in the explanations. I'm going to repeat myself here. The reason we figured this out was we know that F, G, and H cannot go in 1. And then we see that they have to be non-consecutive as far as Rosenberg is concerned. So the earliest we can start is 2. So we have 2 through 6 as possible spaces to put the introductory textbooks. We have 3 introductory textbooks, and we need to space them non-consecutively. That means we need 5 spaces, okay? We only have 5 spaces. 2 through 6 gives us 5 spaces. So we are going to go from the very beginning to the very end, right? And you don't need to think about it in that way. You could just start at 2 and think about it in a more haphazard way and be like, okay, how could I do it? Well, the earliest I could start is 2 and then skip 1 and then put it down, and then skip 1 and then put it down, and it turns out that that's it. So the point is that by either the abstract approach or just by trying it out, you need to arrive at this deduction, which is that the second, fourth, and sixth books that Rosenberg reads are all going to be introductory textbooks.
So once you reach this point, then you would probably think about the x, y, z for Rosenberg. You notice that over here, it can't be x, so it's got to be either y or z. And then on these two spots, it really could be any one of x, y, or z. Basically, since one of the y or z's is going to get used up here, then for each of these spots, we're either going to have an x or we're going to have a y or a z. Okay, so this might be a little bit more complicated, but I'd probably write it like this. One sec. Okay, I'd write it like this. Sorry for that. Just to indicate to myself, it's not really just x, y, or z. It's either an x or a y or a z. Okay, for both of those to indicate that the x actually is going to get used up in 1 and 3. Um, so so that's the case. This is what's going on for Rosenberg. Now let's think about the effect of what we just figured out on Juarez. Uh, One thing that might come to mind right away is okay, if Juarez can't do F, G, and H on day 6, then he's obviously going to have to do X, Y, or Z. But he's already done the X, right? He's already done the X here. So this for Juarez has to be a Y or a Z. And in fact, we actually know that this is going to have to be this Y or Z. That, oops, that whatever guy is in this spot for Rosenberg, that's the same book that's going to have to be in 6 for Juarez. Um, and think about that for a second, right? Y and Z are advanced textbooks, and we know that Rosenberg has to do an advanced textbook before Juarez can do it. So if Rosenberg is doing an advanced textbook in the 5th spot, then there would be no way for Juarez to do it before the 6th spot, right? And that same kind of analysis actually is going to work over here for us too. Let's look over here for a second. This is either going to be F, G, or H for Juarez, right? The first spot is either going to be an F, G, or an H. Um, and then this says that Rosenberg is going to do one of the F, G, or H on the second week. So now F, G, and H are the intro to the textbooks, and for the intro textbooks, Rosenberg has to do it after Juarez. So if Rosenberg does it on day 2, then Juarez is going to have no choice but to do that book on day 1. So it's the exact same kind of analysis, just in the reverse direction that we did here, where it was like, Rosenberg has to do the advanced before Juarez, and Rosenberg doesn't do this particular advanced until 5. So then Juarez would not be able to do it until 6. So this is going to be the exact same one. And the same thing over here. Rosenberg uh, can't do introductory textbooks until after Juarez. So if Rosenberg does this introductory textbook second, then Juarez is going to have to do that introductory textbook first. So this would be an F, G, or an H. And in fact, it's like I said before, it's like I said for this spot, it's not just that we know that it's an F, G, or an H, but we know in particular that it's going to be exactly whichever one this was. And there's actually some more thinking we can do on this. For example, this F, G, or H, okay, since it's the same exact idea, except it's not as clean, this F, G, or H over here, which is in 4 for Rosenberg, has to come somewhere before 4 for Juarez. And the only possibilities are going to be 2 and 3. So this FG, I'm not going to draw it on here because I don't want the board to become too messy, but you can kind of have in the back of your head that we know that this F, G, or H is going to be either second or third. And then when you start to look at it, there's actually only a couple of possibilities for how it can go for Juarez. Because, and I'll just say it out loud, but I'm not going to write it. We know that this F, G, or H, like I just said, is going to be second or third. So then the other spot in this second or third range is going to be taken up either by an F, G, or an H, or by a Y or Z. Okay? So, and then the same thing is going to hold for this spot. This is either going to be a Y or a Z, or it's going to be an F, G, or an H. Now, I said there's two possibilities. Obviously, within those possibilities, there's several ways that it could unfold, but two basic templates for how Juarez could go. Okay, so with all of this done, now I think we are okay looking at the questions. But I'm actually going to run out of time, so let me end this video and we'll start the questions in the next one.